Hello, in this video I'm going to look at how you can start to make a more involved change or modification to our documentation site using the Github.dev environment within your browser. So let's go ahead and jump in. So let's imagine the situation where we have identified that there is an issue with the documentation site, and it may be a more involved documentation change. It might mean making multiple changes to multiple pages. It might be a more involved change to add more information, to edit information. So if you're in that situation, what I would encourage you to do is to go over to the chocolatey.doc site and create a new issue explaining what information you want to make a change to, and basically get buy-in from other folks on the team saying that this is a good idea, or maybe making suggestions as to how that change can be made. Or if there is an already open issue, then you could absolutely make a request on that issue for it to be assigned to you so that you can make the contribution. But like I say, if you're in that area where you're making a more involved change, then making that change directly through the GitHub user interface maybe isn't the best idea, because through the GitHub user interface, you can only make a change to a single file at once. And if your change is a more involved change, then you might need to make changes to multiple files at the same time. So making those changes directly through the GitHub user interface, as we did in the previous video, maybe isn't the best idea. But let's imagine the scenario that maybe we want to pick up this one. So this issue has been created by a community member, and the suggestion here is that we need to document the limitations of running Chocolatey under Mono on Linux. So while you can run Chocolatey on Linux under Mono, there are some things it can and can't do. So the suggestion here is that we add information about doing exactly that. So I think that's a great idea. So let's imagine the scenario we wanted to tackle this. So the first thing that you would want to do is you'd want to go up to the Chocolatey docs, and you would want to create a fork of this repository. Now I've already got one of those, and that's what I've got here. So rather than make the changes directly through the GitHub user interface, so if in theory, let's say I wanted to change this README, I could click edit and I would begin editing that file. But that process is limited in the sense that you can't change multiple files at the same time. The editing experience isn't necessarily great because you're limited to what the user interface can do for you. But if you're more used to using something like VS Code, then there's this thing called github.dev. So I'm going to show that how it works. So I'm on my fork of that docs repository. So what I'm going to do on my keyboard is I'm going to hit the full stop key, or the period key. And what's going to happen is that it's going to say setting up in the web editor. So what this is doing is this is giving you a VS Code instance running in the browser. So it's not running VS Code locally on my machine. It's running VS Code in the browser. And what it's giving me is a view of all the files that are in that repository, with the ability to start editing them. So let's say I wanted to drill down here and I wanted to start editing some of the command sections, or let's say I wanted to start editing a page for running under Linux. So let's maybe want to say I want to create a new file. So I could create a new file called linux.md here, and I would be able to start editing on the right hand side here. I'd be able to say Chocolatey can run on Linux, but there are some limitations. So in here, I could then start stubbing out what those limitations are, and then I could start thinking about submitting that back to the repository as a pull request. But let's say that while I'm here, I maybe wanted to update the index page to have a link to it. I could absolutely do that as well. So I could add in the index page here, running on Linux. So this is me making multiple changes to multiple files. But the benefit of doing this is that over here, I then start to have the option of committing multiple files at the same time. Now, the other interesting thing, if I make my browser slightly different size, at the minute, within VS Code running in the browser, I'm developing on the master branch, or making changes on the master branch. That's not something we necessarily want our contributions coming in like. So in here, I could say, well, I want to create a new branch. So I can give it a name, which is running on Linux. So at that point, I'm going to switch to that branch, and those two changes that I've made, they're now staged, or they're available to be changed on that branch. So in here, I would then be able to start constructing a commit. So the recommendation that we have, or the guidance that we have for commits going into a Chocolatey repository, is that if you're working on an issue, then you tag an issue or you tag a commit with that issue. So let's imagine the scenario again. So I'm working on 260 here. So I would do, I can find where that key on my keyboard is. So it would be 260, add information about Linux. Now, obviously, this is not a full commit. It doesn't have information, all the information in it. But at that point, I could say, well, I want to commit that change. So at that point, that change is now available as a branch, or it will be once I hit the refresh button. If I go back over to GitHub and look at Get 31 and look at the docs, then up here, I should now have a branch that is called running on Linux. And at that point, through the GitHub user interface, I've then got the option of comparing and creating a pull request. Now, you can also do that from directly within this github.dev environment as well. So I could click on GitHub here, and I could click create a pull request. And then because I've been working on it, it's saying merge changes from my fork, which is get31 docs running on Linux, and where I want to target it to. So I could do that with pull request information. I could say, I have added information about running on Linux. Now, I could then click the create button. Now, again, as per my previous videos, I'm not actually going to do that because this is not an actual change that I wanted to make. But what I did want to highlight is that just within the browser, when you're making a more complicated change, then you've absolutely got the benefit of making that change in an editor that has potentially all of your extensions running. So you could have, if you've got markdown related extensions, or you've got linting extensions that help you when you're writing documentation, then you absolutely get to run those in the browser and take full advantage of those things as you're making the changes, rather than directly within the GitHub user interface. So if you're in, if this is how you like to create things or get things updated, then github.dev is a very, very useful way to get up and running, making those changes the way you want them to, and then contributing back into the project. So, like I say, to reiterate it again, just to stress, if you are making a more involved change, or you want to make a more involved change to the Chocolatey doc site, we absolutely welcome that, but we would encourage you to create an issue on the repository to then get buy-in from the team, to then say that we think this is a good idea, maybe these are the things that you want to include, and then potentially some guidance on how to move forward with that, rather than making and potentially doing a lot of work on a change that wouldn't then be picked up and merged into the repository. So hopefully this has been useful to you. Definitely reach out if you've got any questions. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have. But for now, that's it. Thank you very much.